Today we're going to talk about power and our relationship to it. Power is something that we all have. It's our ability to influence others. Generally, we get power from either our relationships or from merit or maybe even from position. We can all relate to the relationship power of a parent and a child. In a group, often the person who is considered the best at something gains power based on the merit of being someone that others choose to follow and get guidance from. Then there's power based on positions, which we see often in the workplace. Power allows us to do things for good. Up until recently, I had a position in my company as Senior Vice President of Operations. Now in that position, I had the ability to use my power in order to do things good. I could influence our HR policies to enhance the working condition of our employees. I could use my power to help control the way that we did things so that the customer experience was optimized. Ultimately, I could use my power to control the bottom line and therefore to help make sure that our shareholders got a fair and equitable return on their investment, which gave us the ability to have employment. So these are all ways that I could use my position power for good. Now, power can also be dangerous. Here's an example of how power can be dangerous. In my position as vice president, I had a boss called the president. And on a rare occasion or two, a decision that I had made publicly got overturned by the president. Well, as you can imagine, I felt threatened in my power. Unfortunately, often when we feel threatened in our power, our response is anger. And nothing good ever comes out of anger, particularly for a Christian. Now today we're going to begin a study for the next 4 weeks of the Herodian dynasty. We're going to take a look at 4 of the 8 kings that made up that dynasty. Now I'm going to warn you in advance, as we do this study, we're going to probably see more examples of what not to do when it comes to power and our relationship to it. But I think we'll still be able to learn some valuable lessons. The first king that we're going to take a look at today is Herod the Great. His father was an administrator in Galilee working for Rome. Herod chose to follow in his father's footsteps. In around 37 BC, he was promoted from governor to king of Galilee. Now, his family lineage goes back to the Edomites. You might remember that the Edomites were direct descendants of Esau. Esau and Jacob had a sibling rivalry that extended down through their descendants, and so there was always tension amongst them. Around 130 BC, the Edomites were forced to accept and convert to Judaism. Therefore, Herod was considered a Jew, but most understood that his loyalty really lied with Rome. That's where he got his power, and so it was pretty obvious his decision-making favored Roman ruling officials. Now we also know that Herod was a hothead. Stories about Herod arranging the execution, the deaths of priests, Roman government officials, and even members of his own family, often in response to suspicions he had that they were a threat to his power. Now our story begins today in Matthew, the 2nd chapter, and I want to read you verses 2 through 4 as we begin. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in the territory of Judea during the rule of King Herod, Magi came from the east to Jerusalem. They asked, "Where is the newborn king of the Jews? We've seen his star in the east, and we've come to honor him." When King Herod heard this, he was troubled, and everyone in Jerusalem was troubled with him. He gathered all the chief priests and the legal experts and asked them where Christ was to be born. So our story opens today. Jesus is in Bethlehem with his mom and dad, Mary and Joseph. We're introduced to the Magi. Traditionally, the Magi were considered to be priests of a religious order originating in the area of Persia. They were known to be gifted in the areas of astrology, wisdom, and magic, and they were highly sought after by kings as advisors. Now they're following a star, and somehow they know about the birth of Jesus and his destiny to be King of the Jews. And so they follow this star into the city of Jerusalem, looking for Jesus, looking to honor him. Now, knowing Herod's history, we can only imagine how he felt when he received the news that the Magi were in town, and more importantly, what they were doing. Our text says that Herod was troubled, and of course it also says everybody else was troubled. Anytime Herod was troubled, anytime he had the suspicion that there was a threat to his power, bad things happened. And so everyone around him knew this time it was a time to keep their head down. Now Herod immediately tries to figure out where this child is, and so we see that he gathers together chief priests and the legal experts, and he asks them, where is this child? Look at verse 5 and 6 and you'll see their response. They said, in Bethlehem of Judea, for this is what the prophet wrote. Now they're referring here to the prophet Micah. You, Bethlehem, land of Judah, by no means are you least among the rulers of Judah, because from you will come one who governs, who will shepherd my people Israel. Take a look at verses 7 through 8. Then Herod secretly called for the Magi and found out from them the time when the star had first appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem, saying, Go and search carefully for the child. When you found him, report to me so that I too may go and honor him. Well, I think we can see what Herod's intentions are here. The fact that he would contact the Magi secretly to make this inquiry, pretty evident that his intentions are less than honorable. Now, it's interesting to me that Matthew's gospel leads us to consider the idea that, it was Herod who actually helped the Magi find Jesus. It's ironic that Herod used his power to question the chief priest and the legal experts and to actually find out where Jesus was and point the Magi towards them. Looking at verses 9 through 11, Matthew writes, When they heard the king, they went. And look, the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stood over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy. They entered the house and saw the child with Mary, his mother. Falling to their knees, they honored him. Then they opened their treasure chest and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. It's interesting how the Magi honored Jesus in a way that would typically be reserved for people of status or rank, certainly not for a child born in poverty. One of the questions that requires reflection is, how did they know who Jesus was? Regardless of what or how you might answer that question, one thing's for sure: when they met Jesus, they were filled with joy. And doesn't that stand in quite a stark contrast to Herod's response when he learned of Jesus? Here's another question. Why didn't they go back and tell Herod what they learned? Verse 12 says, because they were warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they went back to their country by another route. We can only gather that it was God who presented the dream to the Magi. Unfortunately, we know how this story ends. Herod, upset that the Magi didn't return to him, took matters into his own hand. He issued a decree that all of the young male children in the area were to be killed. Imagine, because of his threat to his power. So, what are we to learn from this story today? Well, first, I think we need to be reminded of the dangers of power. We can fall in love and then be so blinded when our power is threatened. Our power can be used for good, or it can literally destroy us in our relationships with others. Secondly, we're reminded of the futility of thinking that we and our power are bigger than God's plans. Despite Herod's intentions, God used Herod's power to get information to lead the Magi to Jesus. God's will is always accomplished, and we can choose to use our power to be a part of that. But rest assured, God can use even bad examples and bad decisions to further his kingdom. This week, give some thought in your daily quiet time about where you have power in your life and how you use it. Consider Herod's example, and if you too are guilty of responding poorly to a perceived threat, decide now to repair any damages that are done. Just like the Magi, God wants to fill our lives with joy. Please join us next week when we're going to take a look at the second of the four kings, Herod Antipas. We'll be taking a look at Matthew chapter 14, and we'll try and discern again some additional ideas of power and our relationship to it.